And the question is simply this: do we love ourselves enough to accept the gift of our humanness and to preserve and protect that gift to become the divinity that is our destiny?
Are we headed in that direction?
The light of the first human exceeded the light of our creators and even their masters. Immediately they recognized they needed to put a damper on the power of our humanness to repress the power of what had just been created. That statement is the blueprint for the history of our species.
Where we're headed into next.
The greatest fear is not that we become rich, not that we become powerful, not that we become famous. That's not the fear of the dark forces. The greatest fear of the dark forces is that we remember who we are.
A divine counsel.
We are the technology we've been waiting for.
Hello, beautiful family. Before we begin today, I want to reveal something about the next chapter that we're building here on Just Tap In. I always knew that this community wasn't only meant to live on a screen. You see, there are three worlds within every human being. The soul, the part of you that knows you came here for something more. The seed of the future emerging through you. The mind and the body, where creation becomes action and where ideas become movements and shared realities. And lastly, the ancestral memory, the remembrance of what we knew before fragmentation. That's why I'm officially launching our first ever fully immersive 7-day retreat and excursion. We've called it Raíz Futura, to see the roots of humanity's future. From August 31st to September 6, 2026, 25 people will gather in the roots of the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta, Colombia. This is known by the indigenous as the heart of the world. It'll be a sacred pilgrimage of remembrance, transformation, and collective heart restoration. We will begin to consciously build and gather with other visionaries and leaders and become architects of a more beautiful world. The new earth emerges when the right people gather in coherence. Applications are now officially open, with some spots filling up pretty fast here. If this feels like a beacon call for you, the link to apply is down below. Much love, family.
Gregg Braden, welcome back on Just Tap In, brother. I wanted to start off a little bit differently today, and I had a question that kind of came through that was really around your legacy. And if this was the final conversation that you were able to have with humanity, where would you begin?
I would begin where everything ends. And that is coming back to the deep truth of who we are, our origin, our history, our destiny, and ultimately our fate in this beautiful world of ours. And that question is the motivation for every talk that I do when I'm backstage. If you've ever seen a video of me coming onto the stage, two mantras. One, I become absolutely empty so that I can be full and present for the people that have trusted me to come and share a day or a few days or a week with them. And then the last thing I say, through us, thy will be done. Some people have asked me sometimes, how do you remember everything that you talk about? And I said, I wouldn't begin to remember. The key is to be as empty of a vessel as possible so that I can be completely available to whatever the moment calls forth, and that's where we are today as well. So, so I think, I'd like to begin with a story today. Are you okay if we do that?
Of course, I love stories.
1,600 years ago, I'll make this a really good story. 1,600 years ago, under what I imagine was the cool air of an Egyptian desert night, but the sands were still warm from the sun during the day, a group of Coptic monks left a monastery under the cover of night and walked through that desert holding a vessel. And inside of that vessel, they had placed the remnants of a knowledge that had just been forbidden at their time in history. The documents had been declared heresy. They were to be burned, to be destroyed, and anyone that was teaching what was in those documents risked their lives in doing so. So those monks, they found their way to the base of a cliff near a village that remains today called Nag Hammadi. And they buried that vessel. And what's amazing to me is that for 1,600 years, other farmers, other shepherds, pilgrims, their feet walked over the top of that buried vessel, having no idea what was under their feet until 1945. 1945, a young farm boy discovered that vessel. It was sealed. And there is a belief in his tradition, in the Arab traditions, there's an energy called the jinn. I know many people are familiar with that, Jinn. It's like a spirit. You could think of it like a spirit. And the tradition is that those jinn sometimes hide in sealed vessels. And he was afraid of releasing that, so he didn't open it. He took it home to his mother. She did open it, and she found 13 leather-bound volumes. Now, this is interesting because they weren't scrolls. They were leather-bound volumes of loose papyrus pages, papyrus from the plants that grow in Egypt, the very brittle kind of paper. I know you've been to Egypt, you know what that looks like. And she had no idea what was written on those pages. She was a very practical woman, and they needed kindling for the fire in their home, to heat their home and to cook on. And no one knows for sure how many pages or how many books became kindling for that family's home until the authorities were alerted, and they intervened. They took that collection of 13 documents into the library, the Coptic library in Cairo. That was 1945. The translations were so profound of what was in those documents and so controversial and so feared by established religion that there were lawsuits, there were corporate attempts, there were religious attempts, personal attempts to keep that information from the public. And it was not until 1977 that those documents were released to the public. Found in 45, held until 1977. 9 years later, in 1986, I had the opportunity to be among some of the first to see those documents when I was on my first journey into Egypt, 1986. And I thought that I had gone to see the pyramids and the Sphinx, which were very cool, and I did. But the part of that journey that changed my life was the time that I spent with those documents in the Coptic Museum. What is now known as the Nag Hammadi Library is recognized as the oldest unedited editions of a collection of knowledge that fills in the missing pieces in so much of what we see happening in the world and in our lives today. There is something missing in our story. We look at the world around us, and I know you're seeing this from where you are in Europe, just as we are here in the U.S. And the world looks pretty crazy right now. And for many people, it appears that there's a lot of chaos for no apparent reason. It looks like things are just coming apart at the seams. Wars are popping off, economic collapse, climate, religious turmoil, all these things. But when you step back and look at the big picture, what you see is each of those are a fragment of a greater process. There is a process that we're in. We're rarely told about that process. That process has a beginning, it has an end. We're in it. The only way out of it is to go through it. And the documents that were sealed in that vase go a long way and helping us to navigate where we are at this time in history and this time in our lives. So that's a big statement to make. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit, unless you want to jump in and say anything about these texts so far.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so where this gets really, really interesting, I mean, it's always interesting, but when we look at the events of the world, what we're seeing, I'll just begin with the big overview. We're living a time of extremes, and I think every one of our viewers would acknowledge that. And you can just go down and tick off the box. We're living social extremes, political extremes, economic extremes, climate extremes, religious extremes, migration and immigration extremes, movement of people, religious extremes, technological extremes, and now extremes of conflict and war are dominating much of our lives. And every one of those is important, and every one of those is real, and they're happening, and in no way would I attempt to diminish the significance and the suffering from any of those extremes, and they are all part of a bigger picture. We're barreling down the road toward a convergence of cycles. Geologic cycles, as a degreed geologist, I've recognized this since the 1970s when I was in the corporations. We know the geologic cycles are converging now. Cosmological cycles that are rarely talked about, astronomical cycles, as well as the economic and the conflict cycles. And what we're seeing, Emilio, is we're seeing the powers that be. We're seeing governments, we're seeing economic systems, corporations jockeying to be in the best possible position as this convergence comes to a head. We're watching them redesign entire societies, redefine borders of nations because of the resources that are held in those nations. This is what we're seeing because the powers that be know what is in those documents that were buried in 1945. Now, the Nag Hammadi Library, it is often discounted by modern scholars who are part of everything that we're talking about right now. They're conditioned through the system to discount anything that doesn't support the mainstream narrative in terms of where we are and where we're going in our world and in our lives today.
Hello, beautiful family. Quick one today. I just wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one of you that have subscribed to this channel. Your subscription means more than you know. Even though it's free, what you're doing is you're empowering a whole channel to be able to do this every single day and continue showing up in the way that we can with all of our resources on hand. Thank you for contributing to the growth of this channel, for sharing it with the people that you love, for creating a conscious movement of individuals that are seeking the sovereignty and the divinity of their soul. This is why we're here. And if you haven't already and you're enjoying this content, I invite you now to look below on that little button that says subscribe and welcome you properly to this community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being who you are and being pure love and radiating that with everyone that you see. Back to the episode.
So if our viewers are going to try to do a Wikipedia search, for example, and some of the things I'm going to say, Wikipedia will not support what I'm saying, because Wikipedia is based, or many of the AIs, ChatGPT, for example, because those systems reflect only what is allowed in the mainstream narrative, only what we've accepted to be palatable in our in our internet searches. So don't be surprised if you don't see what I'm saying. People write to me and they say, well, Wikipedia doesn't agree with that. And then I said, I have no doubt that that's the case. I'm not surprised at all. So the events, the cycle is coming to a close, and the powers that be are jockeying to be in the best position. From my perspective, they've missed the point. because what we're doing is something so much bigger than borders and resources of the earth. It's so much bigger than power and control. We're literally talking about our very humanness and the destiny of what it means to be human. And this is where these texts come in. So let me just go back to the Nag Hammadi text. Some people are very familiar with them. Some people have never heard of them before. These are texts that were written and recorded by a group that is known as Gnostics. So there is no one place or one segment of the population. You can't point to somebody and say, hey, there's all the Gnostics. It is a philosophy. It is a way of being. The word Gnostic comes from gnosis, the Greek word gnosis, which simply means knowing. And after the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, there were many different segments of wisdom traditions that formed following different interpretations of what his life had been. And these were, at first century, there were many different traditions. The Gnostics set themselves apart, and they wanted to honor the true teachings of the master, not as a religious figure. So this has nothing to do with religion, although religions came along later and were built around these very powerful teachings. So the Gnostics wanted to preserve the teachings, and that's why you see among the books in the Nag Hammadi library, probably the most, what is considered the second most dangerous text in the Gnostic library is the Gospel of Thomas. And it's a different kind of gospel. It's not the kind of gospel like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that tells a story. The Gospel of Thomas is a collection of 114 statements that Thomas recorded as a scribe as he followed the Master, Jesus of Nazareth. Yeshua was his name at the time. Some people pronounce it Yeshua. As he followed him, obviously I wasn't there, so I'm just going to kind of say it's like Yeshua said, Thomas, if I say something really good today, will you write it down? And Thomas said, okay. So a collection
That's
of
a good friend.
114. And by the way, this is the Thomas that became known as the doubting Thomas, the one that had doubts as to the power and the experience of Jesus of Nazareth, even after the resurrection. And he was the one that wanted to touch the wounds to see if that was really his master, his friend that was there. So it's interesting that he is the man that actually recorded these statements, 114 of these statements. The statements, so that is one of the second most dangerous book. The first most dangerous book has multiple names. It is called the Lost Book of John, the Secret Book of John, the Apocryphon of John, the Lost Gospel of John. It's all the same book. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But there are other texts in there. The Thunder Perfect Mind, a powerful book written by a Gnostic woman. Where are all the women in these traditions? All the books were written by men. We know they were women and they knew how to write. Well, the answer is that they were deemed heresy, and so they were not allowed in the Christian canon as it became developed. So, Thunder Perfect Mind, there is the Secret Book of Adam. One of the most powerful books, and this is fascinating to me, was not discovered until 1896, yet it is considered to be part of the Nag Hammadi library. So 1896, a German, he was from the German embassy, he was an ambassador, a German ambassador, was scouring the markets in Cairo, and he found an additional leather-bound manuscript that contained these papyrus pages. He had no idea what was in there. He sent them to Berlin to be translated, and they became what today is known as the Berlin Codex. It's still in the museum in Berlin. And what makes this codex so famous is there was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is in this text. It had been rumored for centuries to exist. It's so powerful that the attempt to wipe it from the face of the earth was almost complete. And this is the most complete document. So the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, I think I mentioned the Gospel of Adam. So you get a sense, it's a very diverse collection of texts, but they all speak to the same thing. So let me say just a little bit about Gnostics and why this is so powerful. And this isn't about judging or making anyone wrong. It's about recognizing the deep truth of our history. The world was a different place after the crucifixion. Rome was losing power. They were trying to consolidate their power. And one of the ways they did it, they said, let's consolidate around a belief system, a religion. And a number of councils were held where the bishops of the early church, after the crucifixion, where they examined the texts. It wasn't like there was a nice, neat text at that time. There was a loose collection, and some of them were very widely accepted and widely acknowledged. But they wanted a document that would support the narrative to consolidate the power of Rome, a narrative based around control and power. And what the outcome from that is what we today call the modern Christian Bible, which is the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is it's a good book. It's a good historic document. It's incomplete. And we know that now because these books show us where that incompleteness is. And it's interesting is as much as they tried, even in the existing Bible, there are references to the texts that are no longer available. They missed them. They forgot to take them out. So this is what was happening as there was the Council of Nicaea. Many people are familiar with that, 325 AD or CE, Common Era. There was the Council of Carthage. There was the Festival of Letters that essentially proclaimed that any books not in the Christian Bible were heresy and were to be destroyed, and people were no longer to speak about them. That declaration was the trigger for the monks to collect those books and save one copy. And we don't know if they intended to come back later in their lifetimes or if they left it for us, a generation we couldn't imagine. But here's why these texts. So I just want to give a little background. This isn't channeled information, and it's not, it's not hearsay. I mean, everything that I've said so far is very well documented. The Gnostic perspective, the heresy, was the Gnostics said there's something inside of us, a living spark of a higher realm that cannot be denied. Jesus said this in the Gospel of Thomas. He literally said, if you bring forth that which is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And it makes perfect sense because the power that we hold in our original state, this spark of what is called a divine realm, and I'll define divinity here in just a minute. That spark, if it has the power that the texts say that it has to be expressed. You cannot deny. You cannot repress that kind of power. And if it is expressed through distorted ways, that's what we call disease and illness and death. But the power has to be expressed. So the Gnostics say that, and this is the heresy, and this is literally from the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of John, it said the kingdom is within you. Now that single statement is in direct conflict with the church who said the kingdom is somewhere else. And you need an intermediary to access that. You need us, our rituals, our sacrifices, our prayers, and by the way, your donations. We need all of those for you to get to that place. The Gnostics say, no, the kingdom is within you. And here's what's so beautiful, Emilio. The Gnostics say that heaven isn't a place that we go to, that it is a reality that already exists beneath our own perception of polarity. That it's a reality that already exists, not somewhere that you go, where we are whole, where we are complete, where we have, it's the uncorrupted version of the spark of the divine that lives within us. It's a part of us that's already whole, it's already healed, and that is in direct heresy to everything the church was saying, because if that realm already lives within us, and if we can access that realm, it's pretty hard to control a population with that kind of power. So we were told during that time that we are a flawed form of life, a flawed species. And this is the concept of sin, where that came from, that we need to redeem ourselves. That is the premise of the early church, and it continues today. And all of the texts that were accepted were in support of that premise, that we need to be redeemed. The Gnostics, and this is where I'm going with this, the Gnostics said it's not about redemption, it's about remembering. That as we come into this dense material world, there is a forgetting. And the greatest fear of the dark forces, I think we can all agree there are dark forces in this world today. The greatest fear is not that we become rich, not that we become powerful, not that we become famous. That's not the fear of the dark forces. The greatest fear of the dark forces is that we remember who we are, that we remember the truth of this connection. Now, I'm going to get to the science in a few moments that tells us how the biology within us actually confirms what these texts are saying. But I'm going with the principles first. Because from that time, in that way of thinking, there has been an effort to repress and deny that spark that lives within us, to render us in forgetfulness. And the distractions of the world are designed to keep our attention out there in the world around us, keeping us in a state of survival, fight or flight. And all of these distractions that are going on, all of the scarcity and the wars, so they're all very real. They're very real on one level. And then there's another level where they have become distractions from a much deeper story. So this is what these Gnostic texts were all about, and this is why they were feared by the early church. Now, when we go into those texts, they go back thousands of years before the 1st and the 2nd century to tell the story of who we are, where we come from. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. And I'm just going to say, we get to choose the language that we use to explore this story. So some people are very comfortable with a biblical language. And the Bible's it's a good document. It is a historic document. You can follow the words in the Bible and go to a place in the Holy Lands and dig in the earth, and there is the temple that's described right there in the text. It's a very good historic text. The problem is that it is wrapped around religion. Religion is the dogma. It's the rules, it's the rituals, it's the sacrifices that are required for someone who believes in that document. Okay, so that's one way of exploring our past. We can go to our ancient history. We can go to the ancient Sumerian or Mesopotamian. So Mesopotamia is a region. Within that region were the civilizations of ancient Sumeria, ancient Babylon, ancient Acadia. And they all recorded their history in a language called cuneiform that's no longer used today. But we can go into those preserved cuneiform texts. They tell a story of our origin and who we are and where we come from without the religion. Or we can go into the Gnostic texts. They tell a story of who we are and where we come from, and they do it from a spiritual perspective without the religious implications. Or we can go to modern science, who simply looks at the world and our biology and our relationship to the world. Every one of those is a different language. They all lead to exactly the same place. Every one of those, including modern science, says that we are the product of an intentional act that happened about 200,000 years ago. So scientists agree on the date. We appeared, anatomically modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago. And there's some new fossils that may push that back a little further, between 2 and 300,000 years. Scientists agree with that. Scientists, the scientific community also now, through DNA testing, agrees that the mutations that give us our humanness cannot happen in nature. They cannot happen under natural conditions, that there appears to be some kind of intervention. And then they stop there because they don't know what to say about that. But they know that the fusions, for example, that gave us chromosome 2 is a perfect example. And the modification of the genes after that fusion to stabilize that fusion, that can't happen in nature. And it didn't happen slowly, gradually over a long period of time. The fusions and the mutations that give us our humanness happened quickly about 200,000 years ago. So that's where the scientific community is. When we go back into the texts, we go back into the biblical texts are heavily edited. And we know that because we found copies of the biblical books that were not edited, and we can see what was left out. This is why the Dead Sea Scrolls were so powerful. They were the oldest records of the Old Testament, and they showed us where the language and the records were very stable, and then they showed us where the changes have been made. The Nag Hammadi library was the oldest records of the New Testament and the Gnostic texts, and they show us the same thing. So you put those together, we get a pretty good picture from that perspective. So all of them say we're the product of an intentional act. Now we go back to the Gnostic text. This is where we began. Some of the most detailed information, and this isn't science. This is information that has been passed from generation to generation that science now parallels. So and I'm hesitating because it's such a dense text. It's not easy reading, and I'm not sure how deep we want to go or how much time we have. But essentially, well, the gospel, the secret book of John gives a detailed account of what happened when we were created. Now, the Christian Bible, you look at Genesis, it's reduced to about a single sentence. God breathed the breath of life into the nostrils of man, man became a living being, and boom, we're off and running. And that is a little condensed piece. So in the secret book, the lost book of John, or the Apocryphon of John, first of all, one of the most controversial pieces is that we are the product of a collective intelligence rather than a single divine being. In other words, it wasn't one male, one God with a capital G, but it was a collective. Genesis reflects that as well, because the English translation where we see the word God comes from the word Elohim, which is very controversial. El is God, and him is plural in the Hebrew language. And linguists acknowledge that, and they make an exception. They say, yes, that's true, except here in Genesis. In Genesis, to revere the all-encompassing power of God, God is identified as a singular. But it It doesn't work that way in the linguistics. And in all the other texts, where you're looking at Sumerian texts, you're looking at Babylonian texts, we're looking at the Gnostic texts, all of them tell us that God was part of a divine council, a collective that participated in the creation of the first human. And when the first human was created, what they recognized was that we were imbued with a power within us that exceeded even that of the creators. In other words, the genetic combination that they had pooled together to give us our humanness transcended what they had within themselves. And we can talk more about why that is and where that comes from. But here's the point, and this is why I'm saying this, and this ties into everything that I'm going to say now. They give a mini sentence description of what happened, how the light of the first human exceeded the light of our creators and even their masters, is what it said. And immediately they recognized that they needed to remedy this. Immediately they recognized they needed to put a damper on the power of our humanness, to repress, suppress, diminish the power of what had just been created. That statement is the blueprint for the history of our species. Our history is the story of us trying to preserve and maintain the gift that we were given in the presence of powers and forces that want to repress and suppress and deny that. That history underlies the great civilizations of the past, it underlies the great wars of the past, and it underlies what's happening in our world right now with the attempt to replace our biology with technology. When we replace our biology with technology, our natural abilities begin to atrophy. Now, so this is where I'm just going to, I'll pause here in just a moment, but I want to complete this thought. What we were given was a form of DNA, carbon-based DNA, and apparently those who intervened in our creation are something other than carbon-based DNA. Carbon-based DNA is scalable. In other words, there is no top end to the performance and what it is capable of doing. There's again, I'm hesitating, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but one of the places where science is now catching up with all of this is that scientists are beginning to look at the human body less from a biological perspective. Well, we've done that. We've explored that. We've got that nailed. But they're looking at the components of our body, our cell membranes, and the molecules, the DNA, the way the heart functions, the toroidal field of the heart, the iron-carrying hemoglobins in the body. They're looking at this from an IT perspective, information technology. And there is a journal that published an amazing peer-reviewed journal. They had a conference, and it was called the Proceedings from the Conference, the Journal of Soft Computing. And literally what they said is that human DNA is a 3D fractal antenna that is tuned to electromagnetic and resonant frequencies in the world around us. All right, so this is the metaphor. This is science saying that it's not like a hard antenna like you see on the top of your pickup truck. This is a soft antenna, and a fractal antenna means it's tuned to a broad spectrum of information, many ranges of frequency across realms of information. So when we were given our humanness 200,000 years ago, you could say we were given the antenna that allows us to tune in this material world to something so beautiful and so powerful and so precious and so rare in another realm, to bring the essence of that realm into our world through our carbon-based bodies. That is what sets us apart from all other life. When you replace that with synthetics, with silicon, with artificial intelligence mimicking our cognition, with chemicals in the blood that mimic our immune response, with, I could go on, there's a whole list of what we could do here. The point is that when we replace our natural biology with synthetics, we lose that gift. We lose access to that higher realm. In spiritual terms, that realm is called divinity. And the way that we define divinity, it's not a religious term at all. Divinity is defined as our imagination, our creativity, our innovation, our empathy, sympathy, compassion, our ability to forgive like no other form of life can forgive, our ability to have deep intuition, to heal. Our birthright is to heal. All of those are expressions of divinity. We lose that when we lose our connection to that higher realm. We lose our connection to the higher realm in two ways. One, either to replace the DNA with synthetics, or two, keep the DNA, but keep our attention and our awareness spun up in fear and focused on the world around us, so that we don't have the opportunity to focus on the world within us, to direct our attention back into our inner world, specifically into the toroidal field created by the human heart. So I'm going to stop right there, because we just covered a lot of ground, and it's your podcast, and I'm going to apologize if I spoke too much, but I wanted to lay that foundation, because you can't separate what happened in the past from what's happening now. And it's no accident those documents were discovered less than 100 years ago, so that we have them now to remind us of who we are, so we can awaken from our forgetfulness.
Thank you, brother, for that deep synthesis. And one thing that I'm tuning into right now is essentially that many voices are speaking up about there's a tipping point that we're confronting, a convergence, as you use in your words. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people in the millions are beginning to not only understand, but also remember actively this latent capability that has been suppressed for thousands of years, since the last cataclysm, or since even before that. And so as we're entering this new cycle, what I did want to explore for just a moment, you mentioned there at the end, the heart, the power of the heart, these capabilities that are emerging within us when we don't go that route of synthetics, of transhumanism. Those of us that make that decision and clear choice to transition into the actual original template of the human, what emerges from there? What have you explored? And maybe when you use your imagination, and also from the historical evidence, maybe even lost texts before that we haven't even spoken about, what was possible for humanity, and are we headed in that direction?
You know, the Sumerians, mainstream wants to discount a lot of the Sumerian traditions. Biblical scholars, the real biblical scholars, not the pop scholars that show up on, TikTok or something like that, but the real scholars acknowledge that much of our modern Bible, as good as it is drawn from the earlier texts of the Babylonian traditions and the Sumerian traditions. They have the flood story, and they have the Noah story, and they have the creation of the earth story and creation of the first human, and it's almost line for line. It parallels those things. The probably the best known of the Mesopotamian text is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story that people are interested in in reading that for themselves. It's broken down into numbered lines. Man, it's complex, and there's a lot, but it's all there. So, but they all talk about the power of the human heart. The narrative, the modern narrative today, is the heart is simply a pump. And if that's all it is, I mean, you can build a machine to pump blood. But the pumping of the blood may be the least of what our heart does. What we now know is our heart is on so many levels. There's a toroidal field that surrounds every human heart. It looks like it's a torus. It kind of looks like a donut, and that extends above and below our feet. I've seen pictures of it where the field only goes down to somebody's knees. That's not true. It encompasses the whole body. But that field is the beginning of even a larger field on the quantum level. And it's in that field that we pump the acoustic signature into the world around us of what we perceive to be true in the world within us, our feelings, our emotions. And it is that powerful toroidal field and that acoustic signature that holds the key to ultimately to our salvation. Because when we awaken and ignite the power of that toroidal field, the forces that we call dark forces, you don't have to fight them. It's not about fighting. That's the old model of force against force. What happens is when we awaken the power of our heart, and I'm going to address how that's done here in just a moment. When we do that, we diminish the authority of any dark force in the world around us. And you're not fighting against it. You're becoming the best version of yourself, the deep truth of what it means to be human. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's such a powerful momentum that is being attempted to replace our bodies with machines, because we are so close as a civilization to collectively reclaiming the deep truth of our humanness, and the power of our heart certainly is a big part of that. When you think about the body from an IT perspective, when we begin to create the acoustic signature in a toroidal field of compassion, for example, or of care, or gratitude, something like that. What's happening is the blood in our bodies, it's more than just taking oxygen to the cells, because the iron in our blood is harmonizing with the iron at the core of this very planet. We live on a planet with an iron-nickel core, primarily iron. That's not separate from us. We begin to synchronize and literally have the power of the planet under our feet that is driving the peace that we feel in our bodies through these fields in the heart around us. And when enough of that happens collectively, we begin anew. We live in a very different world. It's not that we fought and defeated the forces, it's that we triumphed over the attempt to limit and diminish our humanness. We triumphed in that struggle rather than fight against another force that is superior to us in some respects. So it's not about fighting and resisting. It's about, that's the old model. That's what keeps us locked in the suffering and the fear if we fall into that trap. It's about becoming the deep truth and honestly becoming. This isn't about saying, oh, well, nothing's going to bother me and living in denial. I've seen people, especially in the New Age community, I've seen people do this. They say, oh, well, I've already ascended and here I am, and then the first time something happens in their lives that ignites a feeling of fear or sadness, they're not equipped to deal with it because they haven't been honest with themselves. If we're in the world, if anyone's in the world right now, this is why we're here. We didn't come here to hide from the uncomfortable feelings, and we didn't come to You can't come to learn something that you already know. I can't teach what everyone already knows. I can remind people through my words of the deep truth of what it means to be human and why it's so precious and why we're worth preserving. I can do that. We didn't come for the mothership to come and take us away when things get tough. I know people, and I'm sure you do as well, their lives are a wreck, and they're saying, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm just waiting, for the mothership to take me away. We're here to live the truth of what it means to be human, to transcend what has been created in this world. And the way we do it, and this is where this is very subtle, because there are a lot of people out there saying you have to strive to achieve your humanness. You've got to go to all these workshops, you've got to read all these books, you've got to, go on these retreats, and all of those things can be good. All of them can be fun. All of them can create community where we find other people that we connect with. And the truth is that none of those are necessary. To achieve our divinity is not something that we have to strive for. When you take away the lies, you take away the programming, you take away all of the things that are not true, all that's left is our divinity. It's already there. When we take away the things that are not true, all that remains is that truth. And that's very different from feeling that you have to strive and compete and work and you compare your achievement to other people and say, how come they're doing more than I'm doing or they're better than I am? It's not like that at all. So it's a different way of thinking for some people. I know that. And everyone learns differently. I know that. And we're all on different paths, but we're all going to the same place. And it's because we all learn so very differently. I think that there are so many different paths that are available to us, but they all lead back to us. They all lead back to ourselves. And the reason, and we're told this in those texts time and time again, and maybe this is what I want to leave our community with here. The reason is because we are the prize. We are the prize. All of the things that are going on in the world around us are all happening. They wouldn't be happening if we weren't here. They're all happening because we hold something so ancient and so rare and so beautiful and so precious and so powerful that there are forces and powers in this world that will go to any extent to keep us distracted from remembering that power within us. And as we awaken to the truth of that power, those forces diminish in our lives. The significance that we give to that power and control, it diminishes. And it's already happening. You see people that just, I think everyone's exhausted, first of all, from everything happening in the world. We don't know what's true and what's not anymore because there's so much false information, and deep fakes, and AI has contributed certainly to the abuse of AI has contributed to that in our social media. And people know something's up, Emilio. And when I go to I live in a rural community here in northern New Mexico. I go to my little food co-op. And, my brothers and sisters aren't having this conversation. They don't have the luxury to take an hour of their day and sit and talk about these things. They're struggling with 2 or 3 jobs, multiple kids, just trying to make ends meet, trying to keep their home, trying to keep food on their table. So they don't have time for this, but they do know something's up. And what they say to me is, Gregg, we need to go back to the basics. And they are. They're pulling their kids out of public schools to homeschool their kids in the values that they cherish as a family. They're growing a lot of their own food. They've stopped going to traditional medicine because they can't afford the insurance, they can't afford the fees. And they've learned through traditional ways from their parents and their grandparents and the indigenous elders that we have a whole medicine cabinet growing in the fields around our communities. Now, I want to be really clear. Modern medicine is awesome, and you cannot beat modern medicine for diagnostics. You got something going on, modern medicine can tell you pretty quickly what it is. Now, how you deal with that, you have a choice. Sometimes it's good to follow modern medicine for whatever it is you're dealing with. Sometimes you could do it in other ways. People ask you my advice. My advice is do whatever you need to do to stay alive. Do whatever you need to do to stay alive, and then you can rethink how you approach health and healing. But it's tough to do that if you're no longer in the world. And I'm speaking from experience. I have multiple friends who are no longer here because they were so dialed in to one narrow way of thinking about healing and health at the exclusion of everything else. And what they were dialed into wasn't true. It didn't work. And it cost them their lives. So I think it's important do whatever we need to do to stay alive and to recognize that we are moving back toward the basics. Not that we're going to dismiss technology. I think we'll always have technology in our lives, and I welcome the tech, but we allow the tech to serve us and not enslave us. We live a little closer to the earth, a little closer to family, a little closer to community, a little closer to the truth of our humanness and who we are, and allow that technology to bring us together as community and to help us to become the best version of ourselves. That's very different than giving away our humanness in exchange for the speed and the efficiency of a computer chip or AI. There's a whole conversation. I have a book called Pure Human where I talk about that extensively, and so I won't go that anymore. But back to what you're saying about the human heart, as we learn to hold that focus, and the Institute of Heart Math, we've talked about them on your program. I think you probably interviewed some of those people. I've worked with them since their inception in 1994, 95. And they have probably done more in the Western world to bring an awareness to the power of the human heart and the techniques, the very easy techniques that we all can do in our living room, every day of shifting our focus, shifting our breath, and shifting our feeling into our hearts to create what is called coherence between the heart and the brain, between the neural network that we know is in the brain and the neural network recently discovered in the heart. But the texts tell us we can go even further than that, because when we develop and hone those skills, we bring that coherence beyond our bodies into the world around us. And the coherence that we create within us then is reflected in the world around us. And that I've seen that happen in a corporate boardroom. When I was working at Cisco Systems, I was their first tech ops manager in 1991. And I saw these kinds of techniques working, not necessarily what HeartMath is doing, but they were coherence building techniques. I've seen it in my community, and I've seen it in events where we have thousands of people in the room, and that's one of the beauties of coming to an event is you have a collective heart field. You might have 2,500 people in a room, but every one of those people has a heart, and each heart has a field that extends 3 to 5 feet beyond the physical heart. And when we're in that room, we're all within 3 to 5 feet of one another. That means we're sharing a collective heart field. And when that happens, that's where you see miracles happen. So I'm not a medical doctor. I can't make claims. I will tell you from firsthand experience, I've seen healings, amazing emotional healings, certainly, psychological healings, but also physical healings as the body aligns with the toroidal force and the acoustic waveforms from a coherent heart field. And we call that a miracle. I think in a few more years, we're just going to call it a science because it reflects the deep truth of our relationship to the world around us. It doesn't have to be a mystical experience. It can be, That doesn't have to be a mystical experience when we understand the mechanism, because we are the technology. We are the technology we've been waiting for. I'd love to say that.
Beautiful, brother. I'm gonna use our last 5 minutes of wiggle room to getting to something that you mentioned toward the beginning and wrapping it all up. You mentioned in those original texts, there was not just one God that created all of this in that one simple sentence. There was a divine council. And I'm curious to know, as you see these next 4 years, I know 2030 has been such a deep convergence point that you've honed in on. What is the role of this divine council of beings that created humanity into understanding where we're headed into next? Not through the perspective of, oh, there's going to be a motherboard ship that's going to take us away. But so many people are starting to remember our multidimensionality, and that we've been many faces before, we've been many bodies before, we've been many species before, galactically. When it comes to our convergence in the next 4 years, how do you see that playing out with, one, the divine council of beings that created this species, this version of us, and other paradigms that are also going to come with that new understanding?
Well, it's a big question to answer in 4 minutes, but this is, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. This is one of those places we get to choose the language to understand what's happening. We can talk about angels and demons in the heavens having a battle before we were ever created, and that battle ultimately coming to earth in terms of darkness and lightness and the emergence of the first humans from that. You can use that language. Or you can talk about highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, intelligent beings from another realm having a battle in the cosmos using forces that we've never seen before, that eventually that battle came to earth and the first humans were created from that, and you're telling exactly the same story. You can talk about angels with wings, or you can talk about ancient Babylonian rulers with wings, or you can talk about Native American warriors with wings. They're all leading to the same place. The same place is that there was a form of life created, unlike any other form of life, imbued with gifts that were given to no other form of life, and we are that form of life. And I think ultimately it comes down to us. We may have, what the ancient texts say is that ultimately, in the struggle for our divinity, ultimately the light, the forces of light, or the forces that you would think of as light, they prevail. But there is a catch, and the catch is that we must accept the gift of our divinity. In other words, meet them halfway. And in order for their intervention to be meaningful, for them to help us, we've got to accept the truth of who we are. We can't sit back and say, hey, come save us. That's not going to work. So the way I'd like to end is with the essence of all of these texts, whether they're Sumerian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, the Egyptian texts, my time in Tibet, certainly the Gnostic texts, they all come down to the same thing. And the question's all about love, Emilio. And the question is simply this: do we love ourselves enough? Do we love ourselves enough to accept the gift of our humanness and to preserve and protect that gift, to become the divinity that is our destiny? That is what the question that faces every one of us right now. Maybe not in those words, but we're all facing that right now. And everyone listening has a challenge in their life right now. Whatever that challenge is, it's the challenge that is leading to the answer to that question. How, as beings of divinity, not as powerless, flawed victims of a world that we have no control over, which is the narrative that we're given. But as divine beings, how does a divine being deal with a difficult relationship? How does a divine being deal with the disease in the body? And the answer to those questions is very different, because when you accept your divinity, then you begin to look at yourself and feel differently about yourself and pursue a path that allows you to be part of rather than separate from the solution. And it carries us into a higher realm of whatever the challenge is, whether it's a financial challenge or relationship or a health challenge or a geophysical, where should I live, where's my community kind of challenge. That's up for everybody. Whatever it is up for our viewers right now. That's the challenge. It's inviting us to ask the question, do I love myself enough to accept my divinity? And in my divine essence, how do I deal with this challenge? And I think where that leads will surprise a lot of people.
Beautiful place to end, brother. As always, we'll include all of your links down in the show notes where people can go even deeper. Your books have been some of the most transformational in my personal journey. And so I recommend a lot of people just to start there. All this wisdom and time capsules that you've left for the future of humanity and the new story that we're creating. So I appreciate you, my brother, my Cancerian brother, all the love. And I hope to do this again very, very soon.
I appreciate you, Emilio. Thank you for trusting me with your audience, my family, our community. And yes, Cancerian brother, we got birthdays coming up here. We can celebrate another revolution around this big, beautiful sun of ours. And I look forward to our next. All right.
Most definitely. Much love, brother.
Thank you.